Munich, Germany, spring 2015. Greta Hoffmann climbed the narrow stairs to her grandmother's attic for the first time in decades. Oma Margarita had died 3 months earlier, at age 93, taking her secrets to the grave. Or so the family thought. The attic smelled of dust and old paper. Greta moved aside boxes of photographs, carefully preserved ration cards from the war, her grandfather's medals from the Eastern Front. Then she found it. A leather-bound journal, hidden inside a false bottom of an old medical bag. Her grandmother's handwriting. The first entry, Berlin, January 43. I am 21 years old. Today I became a nurse for the Wehrmacht. I thought I would save lives. I had no idea what was coming. Greta sat on the dusty floor and began to read. What she discovered over the next 3 hours would change everything she thought she knew about her grandmother, about nurses in Nazi Germany, about the terrible truths that an entire generation took to their graves. This is that story. When Adolf Hitler's war began in September 1939, Germany needed nurses badly. The Wehrmacht, German armed forces, had approximately 10,000 trained nurses when war started. By 1942, they needed 100,000. The German Red Cross, Deutsches Rotes Kreuz, DRK, launched massive recruitment campaigns. The posters were everywhere. Beautiful young women in crisp white uniforms, Red Cross armbands prominent, caring for handsome wounded soldiers. Become an angel of mercy, the posters proclaimed. Serve your fatherland. For young German women, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Escape farm life or factory work, learn a profession, serve the nation, maybe even meet a handsome officer.
What the posters didn't show was what actually happened to nurses once they put on that uniform and Red Cross armband. Margarita Fischer was 19 years old in 1941. She lived in a small Bavarian village where opportunities for young women were limited. Marry a farmer, work in her father's bakery, or maybe become a teacher if her family had money. They didn't. When the Red Cross recruiter came to her village in spring 1941, Margareta was entranced by the presentation. The recruiter, Schwester Brunhilde, wore an immaculate uniform and spoke of the nobility of nursing. She showed pictures of clean hospitals, grateful soldiers, and spoke of the Kameradschaft, or comradeship, among nurses. "You will be protected," Schwester Brunhilde said. "The Red Cross is neutral. Under international law, medical personnel cannot be harmed. You'll be safe, and you'll be helping Germany win this war." Margarita's parents were hesitant, but she was determined. In July 1941, at age 19, she took the train to Munich for nursing training. The training was brutal, 6 months compressed into 3. Anatomy, first aid, surgery assistance, disease management. They learned to work with minimal supplies. They learned to set broken bones, amputate fingers in the field, deliver babies in bunkers.
But there was something else they learned, though it wasn't in any textbook. The older nurses, the ones who'd served in Poland or France, would sometimes pull the younger girls aside. "Listen carefully," one older nurse told Marguerite's training group in a whispered conversation in the dormitory. "When you get to your posting, remember, you're an officer, but many won't treat you as one. Stay with groups. Never be alone with senior officers you don't know. If a doctor or colonel asks you to help with paperwork in his office after hours, make an excuse. Find an older nurse to protect you." Marguerite didn't fully understand. She was naive, like most of the girls. They thought the warning was about soldiers, rough men from the front who might make crude jokes. They didn't realize the danger often came from the officers who were supposed to protect them. January 1942, Marguerite received her assignment. Eastern Front, Field Hospital near Smolensk, Russia. She was terrified but excited. This was what she'd trained for. She'd be saving lives, helping Germany's brave soldiers. She packed her bag with her new uniforms, her medical kit, and a small crucifix her mother had given her.
The train journey east took 4 days. The train was packed with soldiers heading back to the front, nurses, supply officers. The mood started jovial, but grew darker as they moved deeper into the conquered Soviet territory. Marguerite shared a compartment with 3 other nurses: Anna, 22, from Hamburg; Helga, 24, from Dresden; and Clara, from a small town near the Polish border. They became fast friends during the journey. On the 3rd night, a Hauptmann, a captain, entered their compartment. He was drunk. He leered at the girls and made a comment: "4 pretty little flowers for the Eastern Front. What a waste. You should be warming officers' beds, not wasting your youth in field hospitals." Helga, the oldest, spoke firmly: "We are medical officers, Hauptmann. Please leave our compartment." The captain laughed, stepped closer to Marguerite, reached out to touch her face. "I like the blonde one. So young, so fresh." At that moment, an older nurse, Schwester Zisela, age 45, who had served in World War I, appeared in the doorway. She was a Stabschwester, a senior nursing officer, equivalent in rank to a major.
Hauptmann, her voice was ice. Remove yourself from this compartment immediately. These are officers under my command. Touch one of them, and I will have you reported to the Feldgendarmerie, military police. The captain mumbled something, left. Schwester Gisela sat down with the girls. This is lesson 1. Your uniform makes you a target, not a shield. You're young, you're women, you're far from home in a war zone. Some men, not all, but some, will see you as prey. Stay together. Watch each other's backs. And if you can't fight them off physically, use your rank. Your Schwester, officers, act like it. Welcome to the Eastern Front. The field hospital near Smolensk was not what the recruitment posters had shown. It was a former Soviet school building, partially destroyed by fighting. The windows were broken, covered with boards. The heating barely worked. When Marguerite arrived in January 1942, it was minus 30 degrees Celsius outside. The hospital housed approximately 600 wounded soldiers at any given time. There were 45 nurses and 12 doctors. The ratio was impossible. The work was endless. Marguerite's first day, 6 a.m., wake up in the freezing nurses' quarters, a basement room with 20 bunk beds. 6:30 a.m., breakfast, ersatz coffee and stale bread. 7 a.m., ward rounds. 7:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., non-stop work. Changing bandages, cleaning wounds, holding dying boys' hands, surgery assistants, amputations, screaming, blood, death.
8 p.m., dinner, watery soup and more stale bread. 9 p.m., supposed to sleep. But the work didn't stop at 8. Emergency cases came all night. Convoys of wounded from the front. A nurse might finally lie down at 2 a.m., only to be woken at 3 a.m. for another crisis. The medical realities were horrific. Frostbite. Men came in with frozen limbs, black, dead tissue. They had to amputate fingers, toes, hands, feet, sometimes whole legs. The men screamed. There wasn't enough morphine. Gas gangrene. Infected wounds that filled with gas, turned green and black, smelled like death. If you didn't amputate immediately, the soldier died. Marguerite assisted in dozens of amputations in her first month. Dysentery. The entire hospital had periodic outbreaks. Soldiers literally shit themselves to death. The nurses had to clean them, comfort them, watch them waste away. Head wounds. Men with parts of their skulls missing, brain tissue visible. Some of them were still conscious. They'd grab the nurse's hands and beg, "Just let me die, please." Burns. Tank crews who'd been caught in burning vehicles, skin melted off, faces gone. The smell of burned human flesh became so common that Marguerite stopped noticing it after a few weeks. This was the daily reality. The nurses saw things that would have broken most people. Many nurses did break. There were suicides. There were nervous breakdowns. There were nurses who simply stopped talking, went through the motions like zombies, until they were sent back to Germany as medically unfit. But the medical horrors were only part of the nightmare. The hospital commandant was Oberst Dr. Heinrich Krebs. He was 56 years old, married with 3 children back in Berlin. He was also a predator. Schwester Gisela, the senior nurse who had protected Margarete on the train, pulled all the young nurses together 2 weeks after they arrived. "I need to be direct with you," she said. "Dr. Krebs has a reputation. He targets young nurses, usually the pretty ones. He'll start by being friendly, fatherly. He'll offer extra rations, better quarters, easier shifts.
Don't accept. Once you're in debt to him, he'll come to collect." The girls looked at each other nervously. "What happens if we refuse?" asked Anna. Schwester Gisela's face was grim. "He can't force you directly. That's rape. Even the Wehrmacht has laws against that. But he can make your life hell. He can assign you to the worst shifts, the typhus ward, the burial details. He can arrange for you to be transferred to an even worse posting. He can write negative reports that follow you for your career." "Can't we report him?" asked Clara.
To whom? He's the commandant. His superiors are hundreds of kilometers away. And even if you could report him, what do you think happens to nurses who make accusations against colonels? They're labeled hysterical, difficult, morally questionable. They're sent home in disgrace. "So what do we do?" Marguerite asked quietly. "You survive," Schwester Gisela said. "You stay in groups. You watch each other. You never be alone with him. You never accept his gifts. And you remember, this war will end. You will go home, but only if you survive." For 3 months, Marguerite and her friends managed to avoid Dr. Krebs's attention. They followed Schwester Gisela's advice. They stayed together. They were careful. But in April 1942, Clara got sick. Pneumonia. She was isolated in the sick ward to avoid spreading it. Dr. Krebs visited her alone. When Clara recovered 2 weeks later, she was different. Quiet. Wouldn't make eye contact. She asked to be transferred. The request was denied. One night, Marguerite found Clara crying in their quarters. "What happened?" Marguerite asked. She wouldn't answer directly, but she said something that chilled Marguerite. "He said if I told anyone, he'd have me transferred to a field brothel. He said he'd mark me in the records as morally unreliable, and that's where they send nurses with questionable morals. He said nobody would believe me anyway."
Field brothels. The words hung in the air. Margaret had heard whispers about them, special facilities where women, some prostitutes, some prisoners, some morally questionable women, were forced to serve as soldiers. She didn't know if it was true or just a rumor used to threaten women. It was true, but she wouldn't learn just how true for another year. While nurses like Margaret struggled to survive field hospitals and avoid predatory officers, the Wehrmacht High Command was implementing what they called a hygienic solution to soldier morale problems. In military bureaucraties, that meant organized military brothels. The history is documented. After the war, researchers found the orders, the regulations, the medical inspection schedules. The banality of evil, catalogued in triplicate. The system. Starting in 1940, Wehrmacht High Command authorized the establishment of military brothels, or Militärbordelle, across occupied Europe. By 1942, there were approximately 500 such facilities, from France to Ukraine. The official justification: 1. Prevent spread of venereal disease. Regulated brothels were safer. 2. Maintain soldier morale. Prevent soldiers from raping local populations. Ironic, given what they were about to do. The official regulations ran to dozens of pages. Different brothels for officers versus enlisted men, a class system in everything. Mandatory medical inspections weekly. Pricing schedules. Yes, they had official prices. Time limits per visit. Racial regulations. German soldiers couldn't visit brothels with Jewish or Slavic women. Who worked in these brothels? 1. Concentration camp prisoners. Women from Ravensbrück and other camps were selected for brothel work. Jews, political prisoners, asocials, prostitutes, homeless women. They were told work in brothels or be sent to extermination camps. Not much of a choice. Forced labor. Women from occupied territories, especially Poland and Soviet Union, were rounded up and forced into this system, promised factory work, then transported to brothels. 3. Voluntary German women. Some German prostitutes worked voluntarily. Some women faced economic desperation. Some were coerced by promises they'd get better rations, protection for their families.
The morally unreliable. This is where the threat to nurses came in. Women who were labeled as having questionable morals, unwed mothers, women who refused officers' advances, then be accused of affairs with enlisted men, women who were raped and then blamed for it, could be sent to these facilities.
The threat was real. It hung over every nurse, every woman in occupied territory, every female forced laborer. Dr. Heinrich Krebs knew about the system. All senior officers did. And some of them used the threat systematically. The pattern was simple. Identify young and attractive nurse, offer protection or special treatment. If she refuses, make her life difficult. If she complies, exploit her, then discard her. If she complains, threaten her with accusations of moral unreliability. If she persists, actually have her transferred to a brothel or punishment posting. This wasn't official policy, but it was common enough that nurses learned to recognize the pattern. Schwester Gisela had seen it dozens of times across different postings. The reason it worked, nobody would believe the nurse. The system was designed to protect officers and sacrifice women. Example, if a nurse accused a colonel of harassment, the investigation would ask, "Did you ever smile with him?" Being friendly was encouragement. "Did you ever accept food or supplies from him?" Accepting gifts was prostitution. "Did you ever drink alcohol with officers?" Drinking was loose morals. "Did other soldiers find you attractive?" If yes, you were provocative.
The nurse couldn't win. Meanwhile, the colonel's fellow officers would vouch for him. He'd produce evidence of her inappropriate behavior, a letter she sent to a soldier, a photograph of her smiling at a party. She'd be labeled hysterical, morally questionable, damaging to unit morale. Transfer to a field brothel wasn't common, but it happened enough that every nurse knew someone who disappeared that way. More commonly, the nurse would be transferred to punishment postings, the worst field hospitals, the typhus wards, the easternmost positions where casualties were highest, places where survival was unlikely. May 1943, the situation at the Smolensk Field Hospital was deteriorating. The Soviet offensive was pushing Germany back, casualties were overwhelming, supplies were running low, morale was collapsing. Dr. Krebs became more aggressive in his pursuit of young nurses. Clara had already been victimized. Another nurse, Sophia, had accepted his protection and become his de facto mistress to survive. The other nurses pitied her but understood she'd done what she thought she had to do. Marguerite had so far avoided him by staying in groups, working the hardest shifts, making herself as unprey-like as possible. But in May, her luck ran out. A massive convoy of wounded arrived. The hospital was overwhelmed. All hands were needed in surgery. Marguerite worked for 36 hours straight. When the crisis finally ended, she was so exhausted she could barely stand. Dr. Krebs found her alone in the supply room, restocking surgical materials. "Schwester Margarite," his voice made a jump. "You work very hard." "Thank you, Herr Oberstadis." She kept her eyes down, kept working. "Too hard, perhaps. You look exhausted." He stepped closer. "I've been watching you. You're very dedicated, very attractive when you concentrate." Her blood ran cold. This was the beginning of the pattern. She'd seen it with Clara, with Sophia. "I appreciate the compliment, Herr Oberstadis, but I have much work to do." "The work can wait." His hand touched her shoulder. "You've earned some rest. I have a bottle of real cognac in my office. French, very rare. Come have a drink. We can discuss your career." This was the moment. She could comply, try to manage the situation, or she could refuse and face the consequences. Marguerite made her choice. "Herr Oberstadis, with respect, I don't drink alcohol, and I'm expected in the recovery ward in 10 minutes.
His face hardened. "I wasn't asking, Schwester. I was giving you an opportunity." "I understand, Herr Obers, but I must decline." The silence lasted 5 seconds. It felt like an hour. "I see. You're one of the principled ones, the righteous ones. We'll see how long that lasts." He left. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she dropped the bandages she was holding. She found Schwester Gisela immediately, told her what happened. "That's bad," the older nurse said grimly. "He'll retaliate. We need to get you transferred before he does it himself." "Transferred where?" "Anywhere but here, and quickly." But they were too late. 2 days later, orders came through. Schwester Margaret Fischer was being transferred, not to another field hospital, to a new posting. Assignment: SS-run medical facility
occupied Poland.
When Sister Gisela saw the orders, her face went white. She whispered, "No, no, no." "What is it, Marguerite?" "This isn't a normal medical posting. This is... God help you, child. This is punishment." June 1943. Marguerite was put on a transport west, back through the Soviet territory Germany still controlled, through Poland, to her new posting. The location was a medical facility near Lublin, Poland. The name would later become infamous: Majdanek. Majdanek was a concentration camp complex, a death camp. Over 78,000 people would be murdered there between 1941 and 1944. But Marguerite didn't know that when she arrived. All she knew was that this was an SS facility, not Wehrmacht, and that scared her. The SS had a reputation even among German military personnel. The medical facility at Majdanek served two functions. 1, treating injured SS guards and staff. 2, conducting medical experiments on prisoners. When Marguerite arrived, she was taken to meet the senior medical officer, SS Hauptsturmführer Captain Franz Weber. Dr. Weber was 42, tall, cold-eyed. He looked Marguerite up and down like she was livestock. "So," he said, "Dr. Krebs sends me another difficult nurse. Says you're principled, don't like following orders from superior officers." Marguerite's heart sank. So that was the story. She'd been labeled insubordinate. "That's not true, Herr Hauptsturmführer. I'm a dedicated nurse. I follow all proper orders." "We'll see. Here's how things work at this facility. You'll treat SS personnel. You'll also assist with medical procedures on prisoners. You won't question anything you see. You won't talk about anything you see. You'll do exactly as you're told. If you have moral objections to anything, remember that you're here because you already had moral objections at your last posting. Another incident of moral objections, and your next transfer will be to a much less, pleasant facility. You understand?" The thread was clear. "I understand, Herr Hauptsturmführer." "Good. Report to Schwester Hildegard. She'll show you your duties." Schwester Hildegard was 55, an SS nurse who had been at Majdanek since 1941. She was hard, brutal, completely without mercy. She took Marguerite on a tour of the facility. "This is the SS infirmary." She showed a clean, well-supplied medical ward. "You'll spend some of your time here. Easy work, mostly treating guards for minor injuries, venereal diseases, drunken accidents." Then they walked outside, across the camp. Marguerite saw prisoners in striped uniforms, walking skeletons, eyes hollow, the smell of death everywhere. "This is the prisoner hospital," Hildegard showed, a building that was anything but a hospital. Bare wooden bunks, no supplies, dying prisoners lying in their own filth. "When prisoners are too sick to work, they come here. We keep them alive if they might recover and work again. If not," she shrugged, "they're sent to Block 7.
"What's Block 7? Marguerite asked. Hildegard smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You'll find out." Then Hildegard showed her the medical experimentation block. Dr. Weber conducts important research here, studies on disease transmission, surgical techniques, pharmaceutical effects. You'll assist when needed. The subjects are prisoners, Jews, Poles, Soviets. They're going to die anyway, so their deaths might as well serve science. Marguerite felt sick. This was murder disguised as medicine. What if I'm not comfortable with this?" she asked quietly. Hildegard stopped walking, turned to face Marguerite directly. "Then you'll be joining the prisoners. Dr. Weber has that authority. He can reclassify any German citizen as asocial or morally deficient. You'd be surprised how many difficult women end up on the other side of the wire. Now, do you have any other questions about your comfort level?" Marguerite understood. She was trapped. She could either participate in atrocities or become a victim of them. That night, lying in her bunk in the nurses' quarters, a converted barracks, Marguerite wrote in her diary, the diary her granddaughter would find 70 years later, "I am in hell. There is no God here. If he exists, he has abandoned this place. I see things I cannot write about. I am forced to participate in things I cannot speak of.
I am becoming something I never wanted to be, but I must survive. I must survive to tell the truth someday, even if nobody believes me.
For 6 months, Marguerite existed in a moral twilight. She treated SS guards who bragged about how many prisoners they'd beaten that day. She watched SS doctors conduct experiments that were nothing but torture. She assisted in selections, choosing which prisoners were too sick to live and sending them to Block 7, the gas chamber. She did these things because the alternative was death, but she also did small things of resistance. When treating prisoners who could be saved, she smuggled them extra food, medicine. When SS doctors weren't watching, she gave dying prisoners morphine to ease their pain. She accidentally spoiled some vaccine batches intended for prisoners. The SS used them as test subjects. She passed information to a prisoner resistance network about SS movements. These small acts of defiance kept her sane, made her feel like she was still human, still fighting back. But they were also incredibly dangerous. December 1943, Marguerite was caught. She'd been treating a young Jewish woman, maybe 18 years old, who had typhus. The standing order was typhus patients who showed no improvement after 3 days were to be sent to Block 7. This girl had been sick for 4 days. She should have been selected for death. But Marguerite had been sneaking her extra rations, better medicine. The girl was actually improving. In another week, she might survive.
SS Hauptsturmführer Dr. Weber walked into the prisoner hospital during rounds. He went straight to the typhus ward. "This patient," he pointed to the Jewish girl. "How long has she been here?" Marguerite's mouth went dry. 3 days, Herr Hauptsturmführer. He picked up the chart. It clearly said 5 days. "Schwester Marguerite, do you think I'm stupid? This chart says 5 days. You've been keeping her alive beyond protocol. Why?" The girl looked at Marguerite with terrified eyes. She was showing improvement. "Herr Hauptsturmführer, I thought—" "You thought. You're not here to think. You're here to follow orders." He turned to an SS guard. "Take this prisoner to Block 7, immediately." "No, please," Marguerite started. "One more word." Dr. Weber's voice was ice. "And you'll accompany her." The guard dragged the screaming girl away. Dr. Weber turned to Marguerite. "Come to my office now." This was it. Marguerite thought she was about to be arrested, shot, or sent to join the prisoners. Instead, what happened was somehow worse.
Dr. Weber's office was warm, comfortable. A fire crackled in the fireplace. He had coffee, real coffee, cigarettes, schnapps, all the luxuries that had disappeared from Germany. He poured 2 glasses of schnapps, handed one to Marguerite. "Drink," he ordered. She drank. It burned. "You're a problem, Schwester Marguerite. You were a problem at your last posting. You're a problem here. You have moral objections to orders. You form emotional attachments to prisoners. This cannot continue." "I understand, Herr Hauptsturmführer. I'll follow orders." "Will you? Because right now, I could have you arrested for sabotage. Aiding prisoners is sabotage. Treason. You could be shot." Marguerite said nothing. "However, I understand you're a young woman, far from home, in difficult circumstances. Perhaps you just need proper guidance, proper protection." And there it was. The same pattern as Dr. Krebs, just in a death camp instead of a field hospital. "What I'm offering is a way for you to continue your medical work without these complications. You'd be transferred back to SS personnel care exclusively. No more prisoner hospital, better quarters, better food. All you need to do is be grateful, be companionable, show proper appreciation for protection."
The euphemisms were clear. "And if I refuse," Marguerite asked quietly, "then you're a saboteur, and saboteurs are dealt with harshly." Marguerite looked at this man, SS captain, probably had a wife and children back in Germany, ran a death camp by day, now propositioning a trapped nurse. She thought, I can refuse and die. I can accept and lose my soul. Or I can accept and survive long enough to eventually escape and tell the truth. She made her choice. "I'm grateful for your protection, Herr Hauptsturmführer. I thought you'd see reason. You're a smart girl." For the next 4 months, Marguerite existed in a private hell. By day, she treated SS personnel. By night, she endured Dr. Weber's protection. She wrote in her diary, "I am becoming something I cannot recognize. I smile when I want to scream. I pretend when I want to die. But I will survive. I will survive to tell the truth. That's all I have left. July 1944. The Red Army was advancing rapidly toward Poland. Majdanek would be one of the first death camps liberated. The SS knew it was coming. They began destroying evidence. Gas chambers dismantled, records burned. Prisoners who could walk were evacuated west on death marches. Prisoners who couldn't walk were shot. Dr. Weber called Marguerite to his office. "We're evacuating. You'll come with the SS medical staff. We're falling back to Germany."
What about the prisoners? The prisoners are not your concern. But Marguerite had heard the shots. She knew what was happening. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. "I want to stay and treat the prisoners who were left behind." Dr. Weber stared at her. "Have you gone insane? The Soviets will be here in days. They'll kill you, or worse. I'm a Red Cross nurse. International law protects medical personnel. The Soviets will spare me." He laughed. "You naive child. The Soviets don't care about international law. They'll rape you and shoot you. Is that what you want? It's better than continuing west with you." The words hung in the air. She'd said it. The truth she'd been hiding for months. His face darkened. "You ungrateful!" His hand raised to strike her. At that moment, an explosion. Soviet artillery. Very close. Dr. Weber grabbed his coat. "Fine, stay and die with your beloved prisoners. You're all the same filth anyway." He ran. Marguerite never saw him again. July 23, 1944. Soviet troops entered Majdanek. They found approximately 500 prisoners still alive, skeletons in striped uniforms. The gas chambers partially dismantled but still recognizable. Warehouses full of stolen goods, suitcases, clothes, shoes, hair. They also found Marguerite. She was in the prisoner hospital, treating the sick and dying as best she could with almost no supplies. She was wearing her Red Cross nurse uniform. She was 24 years old. She looked 40.
The Soviet soldiers who found her were confused. A German nurse in a death camp, helping prisoners. A Soviet political officer interrogated her for hours. "You're a German. You worked for the SS. You're a Nazi." "I'm a nurse. I was forced to work here. I tried to help the prisoners when I could." "You expect me to believe that? You voluntarily joined the German military medical corps." "I was 19. I didn't know where they'd send me. I didn't know what was happening here until I arrived." "And once you knew, why didn't you refuse? Why didn't you resist?" "Because they would have killed me. Or worse." The officer laughed. "Worse than being complicit in genocide?" How could Marguerite explain the impossible choices, the daily compromises with evil, the small acts of resistance that kept her human but didn't stop the machine? She couldn't explain, so she said nothing. The officer made his decision. "You're a war criminal. You'll be tried by a Soviet military tribunal." August 1944, Marguerite was tried by a Soviet military court in Lublin. The charges? War crimes, complicity in mass murder, crimes against humanity. Her defense? She had been forced. She had tried to help. She had stayed behind to treat prisoners when she could have evacuated. The tribunal didn't care. The lead judge was a Soviet colonel who had just liberated Majdanek. He'd seen the gas chambers. He'd seen the warehouses full of belongings. He'd seen the crematorium.
"You claim you were forced," he said. "You claim you tried to help, but you were alive, healthy, well-fed. The prisoners were dead or dying. Where was your help then?" Marguerite had no answer. Verdict? Guilty. Sentence? 15 years hard labor in Soviet prison camps. At age 24, Marguerite was sent to Siberia. Marguerite spent 11 years in Soviet prison camps, first in Siberia, later in Kazakhstan. The conditions were brutal: forced labor, starvation rations, cold that went to your bones and never left. Women dying of disease, exhaustion, beatings. But Marguerite survived. The same stubbornness that had kept her alive at Majdanek kept her alive in the Gulag. And she did what she always did. She helped people. She used her nursing skills to treat other prisoners. She delivered babies. She set broken bones. She comforted the dying. The Soviet guards hated her for being German. The other German prisoners, mostly former SS personnel, hated her for betraying Germany by helping prisoners at Majdanek. But the non-German prisoners, Polish, Ukrainian, Russian women who'd been imprisoned for political crimes, they protected her. One older Russian woman, Anna, who'd been imprisoned for counter-revolutionary activities, she'd complained about Stalin, told Marguerite, "You did what you could in hell. That's all anyone can do. Don't let them break you now." In 1953, Stalin died. Gradually, the Soviet camps began to release some prisoners. In 1955, as part of an amnesty program, Marguerite was released. She was 33 years old. She'd been imprisoned for 11 years, almost a third of her life.
They put her on a train to East Germany. After 13 years, she was going home. But home was gone. When Marguerite arrived in East Germany in 1955, her hometown no longer existed. The Soviets had annexed her part of Bavaria. Her family had been dispersed. She found her mother living in a one-room apartment in East Berlin. Her father had died in 1947. Her younger brother had died on the Eastern Front in 1943. Her mother was 62, but looked 80. The reunion was bittersweet. "Where have you been?" her mother asked. "Prison, in Russia." "Why?" "They said I was a war criminal." Her mother's face closed off. "We don't talk about the war." That became the unofficial motto of post-war Germany. We don't talk about the war. Marguerite tried to find work as a nurse, but her record showed Soviet imprisonment as a war criminal. No hospital would hire her. She ended up working in a factory, making textiles. The skills she'd learned, the trauma she'd endured, the lives she tried to save, none of it mattered. She was alone, broke, traumatized, and nobody wanted to hear her story. In 1957, Marguerite met Klaus Hoffmann. He was 35, a mechanic, a widower. His wife had died in the bombing of Dresden. He had a young daughter, Hilda. They married in 1958. Marguerite was 36. She thought she'd never have a normal life. Maybe this was her chance. Klaus never asked about the war. That was the unspoken rule. Don't ask, don't tell.
Margarita tried to be a good wife, a good stepmother. She never spoke about the field hospitals or Dr. Krebs or Majdanek or Dr. Weber or the prisoners she tried to save, or the girl who'd been dragged to the gas chamber, or the 11 years in the gulag. She locked it all away, tried to be normal. But the trauma leaked out in other ways. Nightmares. Klaus would wake to find her screaming about the selection. Flashbacks, certain smells, disinfectant, smoke, would send her into panic. Depression, days when she couldn't get out of bed. Hypervigilance, constantly watching for threats that no longer existed. Klaus didn't understand. How could he? She couldn't explain. In 1960, they had a daughter of their own, Greta, the woman who would find the diary 55 years later. Margarita loved her daughters, but she was a distant mother. She couldn't let them close. Too much pain hidden inside. Margarita's silence was not unique. An entire generation of German women stayed silent about their war experiences. Why? Shame. Germany was collectively ashamed of the Nazi era. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Guilt. Many women felt guilty. Even if they'd been victims, they felt they should have done more to resist. Fear. Some women feared prosecution. War crimes trials continued into the 1960s. Disbelief. When women did try to tell their stories, they often weren't believed. You were exaggerating. That couldn't have happened. You must have done something to provoke it.
Fifth, gender roles. 1950s to 1960s Germany was very conservative. Women were supposed to be wives and mothers, not talk about being victims of sexual violence and war. Sixth, Cold War. East and West Germany both had reasons to suppress certain stories. East Germany didn't want to talk about Soviet war crimes. West Germany didn't want to remind people about Nazi atrocities. So the women stayed silent. They raised families, they worked, they carried their trauma privately. Many turned to alcohol. Many had failed marriages. Many committed suicide. Marguerite survived, but barely. She had periodic breakdowns. In 1972, she spent 3 months in a psychiatric hospital. The diagnosis? Anxiety and depression. Cause unknown. The cause wasn't unknown. The doctors just didn't ask. In the 1980s, attitudes began to change. Historians started interviewing war veterans, including women. Oral history projects began collecting testimonies. In 1985, a historian from West Berlin visited East Germany doing research on nurses in World War II. She interviewed dozens of former nurses. She came to Marguerite's apartment. "Frau Hoffmann," the historian said, "I understand you served as a Wehrmacht nurse during the war. I'm collecting testimonies for historical record. Would you be willing to share your experiences?" Marguerite, now 63 years old, felt something shift inside her. Maybe it was time. Maybe she could finally tell the truth.
"Yes," she said, "I'll tell you everything." Over 3 days of interviews, Margaret told her story. The field hospital at Smolensk, Dr. Krebs and his harassment, the transfer to Majdanek, the horror she witnessed, Dr. Weber and the impossible choices, staying behind to help prisoners, the Soviet imprisonment, the 40 years of silence. The historian was stunned. This is incredibly important testimony. This needs to be published. Margaret signed release forms, felt lighter than she had in decades. Finally, the truth would come out. But it didn't. The Historians University refused to publish the testimony. Too controversial, too focused on German victimhood at a time when Germany was still reckoning with perpetrator guilt. The historian apologized. "I'm sorry. The academic community isn't ready for complex stories yet. They want simple narratives. Germans were perpetrators, Jews were victims. Your story is too complicated." Margaret went back to silence. This time, it felt final. In 1990, the Berlin Wall fell. East and West Germany reunified. Margareta was 68 years old. Klaus had died the year before. She was alone again. She thought, "I need to write it down before I die, before the truth dies with me." She found an old leather-bound journal in a closet, the one she'd kept during the war, hidden all these years. She began to write every night, adding to the entries she'd made during the war. She wrote about the naive girl who joined the Red Cross, the horrors of the field hospital, Dr. Krebs and his predation, the transfer to Majdanek, the impossible moral choices, Dr. Weber, the small acts of resistance, the girl dragged to the gas chamber, the Soviet imprisonment, the 40 years of silence, the attempted truth-telling that failed. She wrote, "If you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. I'm tired. But this needed to be written because what happened to us, the nurses, the women who tried to serve and were exploited and abused and silenced, this needs to be remembered, not because we were heroes, not because we were victims, but because we were human beings caught in an inhuman system, trying to survive and maintain some shred of dignity. That's all. Remember us."
She finished the diary in 1995. She placed it in the false bottom of her old medical bag from the war, the bag she'd kept all these years, a physical connection to the person she used to be. She told no one about the diary, not her daughter Greta, not her granddaughter. She just hid it in the attic and waited to die. She died in December 2014, age 93, and in spring 2015, Greta found the diary. After reading her grandmother's diary, Greta was in shock for weeks. She'd known Oma Marguerite as a quiet, sad old woman who rarely smiled. She'd never known why. Now she knew. But what should she do with this knowledge? She contacted historians, found the same historian who'd interviewed her grandmother in 1985. The woman was now 68, retired. "I remember your grandmother," the historian said. "Her testimony was extraordinary. I've always regretted that we couldn't publish it. Would you help me now?" Greta asked. "Help me get her story told properly?" "Yes. Times have changed.
The academic community is more ready now for complex narratives. Together, they prepared Marguerite's diary for publication. They verified details against historical records, found corroborating evidence. Wehrmacht transfer records showed Marguerite's assignment to Majdanek. Soviet trial records confirmed her conviction. Gulag release documents confirmed her imprisonment.
They found other nurses with similar stories. Women who'd also been exploited, also made impossible choices, also stayed silent for decades. In 2017, they published From Healer to Prisoner, One Nurse's Journey Through Nazi Germany and the Soviet Gulag, the diary of Margareta Fischer-Hoffmann. The book caused controversy. Some people saw it as important historical testimony, finally giving voice to women who had been silenced. Others saw it as German victimhood narrative, trying to make Germans look like victims when they'd been perpetrators. But most powerfully, other women started coming forward. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Former nurses now in their 80s and 90s who'd never told their stories. They thought they were alone. They thought no one would believe them. Now they saw they weren't alone. Women wrote to Greta, "Your grandmother's story is my story. I thought I was the only one who had been exploited by a doctor. I never told my children, now maybe I can. I'm 91 years old. I've kept this secret for 70 years. Thank you for giving me permission to speak." Academic conferences organized, oral history projects expanded, museums added exhibits about nurses' experiences. The stories that emerged: Wehrmacht nurses harassed by officers, Red Cross nurses exploited in field hospitals, SS nurses who participated in atrocities, some willingly, some coerced, nurses who resisted and were punished, nurses who were sent to field brothels as punishment, nurses who suffered Soviet abuse after liberation, nurses who carried trauma silently for decades. The complexity of the stories challenged simple narratives. These women weren't pure victims. They weren't pure perpetrators. They were human beings making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Marguerite's diary also led to renewed research into the Wehrmacht's organized exploitation system. Historians found documentation that had been overlooked or suppressed. Military brothels, 500 facilities across occupied Europe, 34,000 to 50,000 forced women into the system, detailed regulations and medical inspection schedules, pricing structures, racial regulations, nurse exploitation, no official policy, but common practice. Senior officers used threats of moral unreliability to coerce compliance. Women who resisted were transferred to punishment postings. Some nurses were actually transferred to brothels. Post-war, victims were silenced by shame and disbelief. Systematic cover-up. Wehrmacht destroyed records at war's end. Post-war German society didn't want to know. Cold War politics suppressed investigation. Victims died without telling stories. Only in the 1990s to 2000s did research expand. One researcher, Dr. Birgit Beck, published findings in 2004, Wehrmacht and Sexual Violence, documenting systematic exploitation of women, both German nurses and occupied populations. Another researcher, Dr. Regina Muehlhauser, published Conquests, Sexual Violence and Intimate Colonialism During the Nazi Occupation, 2010, showing how sexual violence was used as a weapon of war and control. These researchers, combined with testimonies like Marguerite's, finally exposed the system. Anna's story. Anna was a Red Cross nurse in France, 1943. A Wehrmacht colonel harassed her for months. When she reported him, she was transferred to Ukraine, punishment posting. She was captured by Soviet forces, spent 8 years in Gulag, released 1953, never married, died 2010, without ever telling her family the full story. Helga's story. Helga was SS nurse at Ravensbrück concentration camp. She witnessed atrocities, tried to help prisoners secretly, was discovered and nearly arrested herself. After war, she was tried and acquitted, but carried guilt forever. Committed suicide in 1965, left a note, "I should have done more. I should have died rather than participate." Sophie's story. Sophie was Wehrmacht nurse on the Eastern Front, accepted protection from a senior doctor to avoid worse treatment. He was killed in Soviet offensive. She was captured, repeatedly assaulted by Soviet soldiers, escaped, made it back to Germany, never told anyone, raised 3 children. They had no idea until after her death in 1998. Clara's story.
Clara refused a colonel's advances, was accused of being a morale problem, transferred to a field brothel, told she was morally unreliable, spent 18 months in the brothel, survived the war, moved to South America under false name, never returned to Germany, died alone in Argentina in 1987.
Name: never returned to Germany, died alone in Argentina in 1987. Each story unique, each story similar, a pattern of exploitation, impossible choices, and enforced silence. In 2018, a memorial was unveiled in Berlin for women who served as nurses in World War II. The inscription: in memory of the women who served as medical personnel during World War II. Some healed, some helped, some resisted, some were exploited, some participated in crimes, some were victimized. All were human. May their complex stories be remembered with honesty and compassion. The memorial was controversial. Some felt it excused perpetrators. Others felt it finally acknowledged victims. But it stood, a recognition that history is complex, that people are complex. At the dedication, Greta spoke. My grandmother, Marguerite Fisher Hoffman, was 19 years old when she joined the Red Cross. She wanted to heal people. She had no idea what was coming. She made choices, some good, some bad, some impossible to judge. She suffered, she survived, she stayed silent for 40 years. She tried to tell the truth. Nobody wanted to hear it. She died believing her story would die with her. But it didn't, because she wrote it down, and because times have changed, and because we finally learned that history isn't simple. People aren't simple. My grandmother wasn't a hero. She wasn't a villain. She was a human being trying to survive an inhuman system.
Remember her. Remember all of them. Not to excuse, not to blame, but to understand. Because if we don't understand complexity, we'll repeat the same mistakes. Today, in 2024, we can look back at Marguerite's story and the stories of thousands of women like her and ask, what do we learn? Lesson 1. Systems of abuse require silence. The exploitation worked because women couldn't speak. They were threatened, isolated, discredited. The perpetrators knew silence was their weapon. When women finally spoke, 40, 50, 60 years later, the systems could be exposed. Lesson: listen to women, believe women. Create systems that protect, not silence. Lesson 2. Moral complexity is reality. Marguerite was neither pure victim nor pure perpetrator. She was a person making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. She tried to help prisoners, but also participated in a death camp's operation. She resisted, but also compromised to survive. She suffered, but also inflicted suffering. Lesson: history isn't simple. People aren't simple. We must hold complexity. Lesson 3. Trauma doesn't have statute of limitations. Marguerite carried her trauma for 70 years. It affected her marriages, her relationships with her children, her mental health.
She was never offered treatment. PTSD wasn't recognized for women until decades after the war. Lesson: trauma is real. Treatment is necessary. Veterans aren't just men in combat. Lesson 4. Speaking truth is essential. Marguerite tried to speak truth in 1985. She was silenced. She died thinking her story didn't matter. But it did. When her diary was published, thousands of other women found their voices. Lesson: truth-telling is hard, but necessary, even if it takes generations. Lesson 5. Sexual violence in war is systemic. Marguerite's exploitation wasn't individual bad behavior. It was systemic, enabled by military hierarchy, protected by silencing mechanisms. This pattern repeats in every war: Vietnam, Bosnia, Rwanda, Syria, Ukraine. Lesson:
We must recognize military sexual violence as war crime, prosecute it as such, and create systems to prevent it.
Marguerite's granddaughter Greta, now 64, continues to speak about her grandmother's story. She's become an advocate for recognizing women's experiences in war. My grandmother's story, she says, isn't about Germany. It's about what happens to women in war. Every war. All wars. Women who join to help are exploited by the system they're trying to serve. Women who resist are punished by the system they're trying to serve. Women who survive carry trauma that society ignores. Women who speak are dismissed. This pattern is universal. My grandmother wanted me to tell her story not for sympathy, but for awareness. So maybe, someday, we'll create systems that protect women instead of exploiting them. So maybe, someday, women won't have to wait 70 years to speak their truth. That's why I tell this story. That's why it matters.